Our responsive reading today comes from the Unitarian Universalist Reverend Emeritus Elizabeth Ketchum, who retired from professional ministry in 2019 after 20 years of ordained service. Her poem is titled, "May We Live the Spirit of Pride," and it is a call to action this and every month. With gratitude for the freedom to live our true, authentic selves, and it is a responsive reading, so we're going to say, may we live the spirit of pride. With the courage that comes from challenging fear, may we live the spirit of pride. With sorrow for those who could not be with us here today, and in honor of those who died of AIDS or who lost their lives, may we live the spirit of pride. With grief for those whose pain was unbearable and who left us too soon, may we live the spirit of pride. Looking ahead to the justice still withheld, may we live the spirit of pride. With the confidence that the sense of community banishes isolation and loneliness, may we live the spirit of pride. With the rainbow flag flying high, a sense of beloved community among us, and the joy that comes from making new connections, may we live the spirit of pride. Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me back at the Unitarian Universalist Gettysburg congregation. When you graciously invited me into your spiritual home last year for our Pride service, our main theme was on our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, as well as our third guiding principle, the acceptance of one another and the encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. This Pride service, we will retain that third principle. However, we're going to expand upon it further as we explore a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, otherwise known as our fourth guiding principle. This, I hope, will be an educational service and that you will come away with a clearer understanding of the LGBTQIA+ community and how to be an ally or a better ally to us while embracing us in both our faith and our community. So let us explore the questions, some of which that have already been answered, that were asked during the introduction. And if you have any questions at the end of our service, know that I will remain here for a time to answer those. I invite all of us now to enter a brave space through the words of the Black, queer, female nonprofit leader and trainer, Mickey Scott B. Jones. This is her invitation. Together, we will create a brave space because there is no such thing as a safe space. We exist in the real world. We all carry scars and we have all caused wounds. In this space, we seek to turn down the volume of the outside world. We amplify voices that fight to be heard elsewhere. We call each other to more truth and more love. We have the right to start somewhere and to continue to grow. We have the responsibility to examine what we think we know. We will not be perfect. It will not always be what we wish it to be, but it will be our brave space together, and we will work on it side by side. So let us begin. When we say LGBTQIA+, what do we really mean? Come on, phone, turn around. Sorry. So let's start with the basics. We talked a little bit during the Time for All Ages about that overviewing word of orientation, but there's different aspects to that. There's a difference between orientation, identity, and expression. So orientation is how one interacts with the outside world. And we often use this in the term of sexual orientation. Now, we also have the term identity, and that is our own understanding of who we are. We use it in terms of gender identity. So sometimes you'll hear those people saying, oh, gender orientation or sexual identity. They're reversing the two. Expression. This is how we want to appear to the world, how we dress, how we act, how we do our hair, our makeup, our nails. Having different gender expression to our gender orientation or our gender, like I said, we're not going to have a perfect day, our gender identity. We use gender and expression. We use expression to express ourselves, our gender into the world. Now let's go over briefly the acronym. So we all know it starts with L, and many of us know what a lesbian is, but we're going to use more inclusive language from this service and here going out into the world. A lesbian is a female identifying individual who is attracted to other female identifying individuals. And what do I mean when I say female identifying? I mean people who are maybe assigned male at birth and who identify as a woman, so transgender woman. A gay person is a male identifying individual who is attracted to other male identifying individuals. A bisexual is a person who is attracted to people of different genders who may identify as different genders. So they are more into the person than they are the person's gender. A transgender individual is somebody who does not identify with the gender or the sex assigned to them at birth. This is an umbrella term. We hear other terms within this, including non-binary, gender fluid, gender queer. But essentially, it is someone who is gender non-conforming. Now, going back to that Q, is queer a bad word? Yes, at one time it was a bad word, and it has been used very viciously against the LGBT community. But in the years since, our community has been reclaiming this word. And people who identify as queer might use that as an umbrella term to identify. It could include their gender identity or their sexual orientation. But I ask you to be cautious when you use this word, especially with people who are of the LGBTQIA plus elders. Many of them still don't like the use of this word, and they will not identify with this word because it was used harmfully against them. Younger people, myself included, do tend to use that word as just that umbrella term. An intersex individual, we had a little bit of time for all ages, is somebody who has either chromosomal or physical differences that don't really put them in that binary category of this is a male or this is a female. They might have both or neither sets of reproductive organs, or it could just be something that we don't see physically. Many intersex individuals have been further marginalized in years past, having been forced into that binary and being assigned a gender by a doctor at birth, sometimes even undergoing painful surgeries without the knowledge of their parents or without the consent of either the parents or that child, obviously at birth. So the intersex community is a community that is just now really rising up and learning more about themselves and really learning how to express themselves. A does not stand for ally. We love our allies, and we really appreciate everyone who stands up with our community. But ally is something that isn't an identity. It's something you do. It's an action. So A actually stands for asexual. And it is a person who does not experience sexual attraction, but that doesn't mean they don't experience romantic attraction or even platonic attraction. They just aren't really keen on that sexual aspect of it. Now, that plus at the very end of that LGBTQIA plus community is there to be really encompassing of everyone. So the full acronym is currently, and I say currently because as we said, it's ever growing. It's currently 28 characters long. It's not just letters. There are numbers in it. There is, at one time, I think there was, yeah, there isn't number. There's not an asterisk, though I have seen that used before. But it's just trying to include everyone in that community. Please don't ask me to identify all 28 letters because I will never be able to, but I can get most of them. But I think is also important is there are a couple of P's in there, and that includes like pansexual and panromantic and things like that. But sometimes people, especially who are not part of our community and who are not allies to our community, claim that pedophiles fall under that category. They are not a part of the LGBTQIA plus community, and we completely reject that as a community. So if anyone ever says that, the answer is no, and put a hard stop to it. All right, so let's go over those abbreviations. A lot of people, it's changed a lot over the years. We started out with just saying gay or just saying gay and lesbian. Then we kind of came around and said, okay, well, we'll add that B and that T. And then we kind of reoriented the letters and had a GLBT. That gets confusing. A lot of people still use it. But LGBT, it's pretty clear, but isn't very inclusive. So we recommend people at least add that Q, add that queer, because a lot of people do still identify as queer, add that plus, kind of encompasses a fuller aspect of the community. I will say there are intersex people who don't identify as part of the LGBTQIA plus community because they say this isn't like, this is a part of who I am biologically, it's not part of my identity. But there are others who do identify as it. So you'll see often LGBTQA or A plus, but other institutions will keep that I because we recognize that there is a major part of the community that still identifies as part of it. But right now, I'll say right now, LGBTQIA plus is the most inclusive use of that acronym, and we highly recommend the use of it just because it shows that you are trying to recognize everybody in the best way possible. So as we all know, and as UUs are very much observant to, the community faces a lot of challenges. One of the main challenges that we see is that lack of legal protections, both in law as well as healthcare, within our family services, even on our job sites. There's still that stigma which leads to further harassment and discrimination and bullying, especially in our classrooms. And we've also seen unfortunately, a growing tendency towards violence against the LGBTQIA plus community. Trans individuals have very specific additional challenges. So those who are gender nonconforming, they face other legal issues such as not being able to change their gender name or their birth certificates, their licenses. There's a lot of barriers there. We also know that a lot of people who are identifying as transgender or gender nonconforming experience gender dysphoria. What the outside world sees and how they see themselves, there's no connection there. That causes a lot of dysphoria and can cause a lot of depression and anxiety. The process of gender transitioning is very heavy. There's a lot of aspects to it. Some people decide to go through the physical process or even the surgical process. Others choose only to remain in the social process of transitioning or choose not to transition while they still identify as trans. And then of course, there's that discrimination about whether someone is trans enough, whether they're passing well enough and things like that. Additionally, there's issues for the transgender community, especially in the recent years past. We've seen access to bathrooms. We see access to locker rooms in the schools right now. Sports participation is a big one right now, including here in Pennsylvania with the Protect Women in Sports Act, trying to keep transgender males or transgender females out of cisgender male sports. And when I say cisgender, cis is the root in Greek is the root word for same. So a cisgender individual is someone who identifies as the gender assigned to them at birth. It is in no way used as a insult or injury to that person. So what does it mean to be an ally? So obviously you're not part of the acronym, but being an ally, as I said earlier, it's an active choice. And it can take many forms. We have allies who are fighting for equality on a day in and day out basis, but are not part of the community. We have allies who are part of the community and who are fighting not only for their rights, but for the rights of their children, for the rights of themselves. Excuse me, I'm going to grab my water. Because it is an active process, being an ally is something that you grow into. It's not something we ever expect you to be perfect at right away. It's okay to make mistakes. And what's most important to know is it's okay to ask questions, as long as you do so in a respectful manner. And there's so many ways to be a great ally. The first, and I think you are very good at this, the first that comes with it is listening respectfully. Listen to what someone wants to say, because really, when they come to you, when they tell you who they are, that's because they trust you. They trust you to hold this precious secret that they have held for themselves for so long, because they know that you will carry it in honor and respect with them. Be open to learning and growing as an ally. Receiving that feedback graciously. I know that's something, especially as we're uplifting the 8th principle, we need to be ready to be criticized for the way we've handled things and to go forward with more knowledge and more appreciation for that situation and go better into the world. We also need to know as allies when to ask for forgiveness. Again, we want to be able to ask questions, and sometimes we might not phrase those questions in a healthy or happy way that is respectful of the individual. And so if you're ever called out, just, ask for forgiveness and move on. Being respectful is key as an ally, being supportive, being an advocate, especially right now as we are seeing more and more of the political mindset turned against the LGBTQIA+ community. Now, we talked a little bit about coming out. And I already mentioned that when someone comes out to you, it's because they place that implicit trust in you. Because again, there's a lot of fear. When you come out, it's not a one-time thing. It is a daily process, having to reintroduce yourself, having to change your pronouns in some cases, or just having to introduce another family member, the person they've chosen to have as part of their lives. That's a daily process. And each time they do it, if they don't do it to somebody who would respect them, they're at risk of harassment, abuse, and often violence. And so when someone comes to you, they're placing that trust in you. Again, I need to reiterate that listen to that person. And when appropriate, ask questions. You'll have some people who just tell you, hey, I'm coming out, I'm gay, and that'll be the end of that conversation. And then there will be people who come to you and tell you their entire life story. Be ready and open to listening to what they need to tell you, because you need to know when someone comes out to you, especially if you're that first person, you are their lifeline. You are keeping that person here tethered to this earth, because if you reject them, they've already been rejected by other people, and they may choose to leave. When someone comes out to you, be honest. It's okay if you weren't ready for this conversation. It's okay to say, I'm ready to listen, but I'm not ready to respond. Or it's great to thank them. Thank you for sharing this with me. I need time to better appreciate or understand this. I need to go and do my own research into what you just told me, because you just said one of those 26 letter or 28 letters, and I have no idea what that means. But it's not your job to teach me. I'm going to go and do some research. So I'll be back in 20 minutes and we can continue this conversation. It's okay to do that. But you can also ask if they're willing to talk about it too. So what's most important is be true to yourself and be true to that individual. Know that when someone comes out to you, no matter how they come out to you as far as an orientation or an identity, they're that same person. And that same person is hopefully someone you know and love. But if it's a complete stranger, know that you are the only person that they still trust to tell this truth to. As allies, we need to remember that when someone comes out to us, while it's now become part of our story, especially if they're a close family member, that story still belongs to the individual who's come out. And it's not our place to share that with the world. Again, when someone comes out to you, it's because they trust you. They trust you to hold that part of themselves, and they might not be ready to come out to other people. Especially, we have many teachers here in the UU congregation, here in the service here today. When a child comes out to a teacher, it's often because they're not ready to come out at home. Maybe their parents aren't interested or willing to hear them. Maybe they're afraid that they'll get kicked out of their home. So when a parent, or when a child comes and tells you this story, as teachers, we need to make sure that they're safe. Now, there are some situations, especially as parents and sometimes as teachers, where a person will come out and you need to know how to share it. Like, okay, well, this kind of like changes our whole family dynamic. You're now my son, not my daughter, kind of a situation. Like, to have that conversation, how can we start telling others? What would be your time frame? How would you respectfully like to do this with everybody else? There are literal YouTube videos of, hey, whoever sent you this video, they're coming out, so that the person doesn't have to do it themselves. But some people want to make that very personal. Some people write letters, some people make phone calls. I don't advise texts. I did that to some people, didn't go over well. And I also do not advise doing it on anybody's holiday or anybody's birthday. It's a very awkward time to come out, especially if you don't expect acceptance. So if you know someone wants to come out and they're like, oh, I'm planning on coming out on Father's Day, like be like, let's put a little pin on that and let's like do it a week after. How about that? Yeah, that's what I recommend. Now, again, it's important to, as an ally, recognize your own needs, acknowledge what you're feeling, and whether that's pride or confusion or discomfort, it's even okay to express sorrow, you know, especially if it's your kid. You know, you have this idea of what that child's going to be like when they are an adult, who they're going to marry, how many kids they're going to have. If somebody comes out to you, if your kid comes out to you, that kind of just throws that monkey wrench right in there, right? So we want to make sure, you know, okay, yeah, you've come out and this is going to change how my expectation of your life. It's important that we recognize that our children never were going to grow up to be exactly how we expected because we're our own individuals. But take the time to work through your feelings. You can do that together. You can do that with a spouse. You can do that with a close friend, with a therapist, with your minister. Use your emotions for the basis of that honest and open communication. I cannot emphasize this enough, that expressing yourself, that being open and honest is where it's key. The person is being open and honest with you. It's time for you to give back in being open and honest with them. And there are support groups. If a member of your family comes out, your local LGBT centers are there to support you. PFLAG National, PFLAG local chapters are there to support you. The Trevor Project is there to support families as well as the individuals who have come out. So just know that there are innumerable resources to help you through that process. Now, how do you support your loved ones? There are thousands of ways to show your support, and there's no one right way. A few minor ways are thanking the person for coming out to you, treating them the same way you always have. As an ally, it's important that you confront inappropriate language or situations with courage and grace. I often encourage people to call people into the conversation, not call people out unless the situation is dangerous. Actively advocating for the LGBTQIA+ community, for their inclusion and equality and equity is very key. By advocating and supporting LGBTQIA+ people, you are setting an expectation for others to follow you. Now, I'm going to briefly, I recognize we're running a little long, so I'm going to briefly go over the use of pronouns. So using the correct pronouns is very key. So when somebody comes out as gender nonconforming, they'll often introduce you with new pronouns. Using those correctly is very important. And we want to make sure that we don't make assumptions when people come out to us, or even when we meet people in the world about their gender just because of the way they're dressed or from any other aspect of themselves. When someone doesn't know, when you don't know somebody's pronouns, it's fine to introduce yourself and say, hi, my name's Tesla. I use he, him pronouns. It encourages others to introduce themselves with their pronouns as well. But it's also okay to ask directly, what pronouns should I use when I'm referring to you? That's a great way to ask that. Because we are mostly focusing on how to be good allies, I do want to talk about how do we address inappropriate language. Previously, we've had terminology that we no longer use, things like that have a medical connotation, like homosexual, we don't really use anymore, or transvestite or transsexual, we don't use those terms. It's now gay, lesbian, queer, transgender, gender nonconforming. Derogatory terms and slurs, we call those out, nip that in the bud right away. They have no place in our civilized society. And what to do when any of this is encountered: first, you check on the individual that was targeted and you make sure they're okay. Secondarily, as an ally, you find out, do they want to handle this situation or should you? Don't always assume that just because they were the target that you need to step in and be their barrier from whatever is being aggressive towards them. Sometimes we as part of the community want to stand up for ourselves, and we like having that opportunity. But if someone says, hey, no, I'm good, you take this one, then you should always use that call-in approach. Why did you feel like that was appropriate language to use? Or we don't use that here. Where did you learn that that was okay to say? Just always be clear in your setting of boundaries. Other ways to be an active ally is to speak out and stand up for the LGBTQIA+ community. We know of hundreds, over 200 pieces of anti-LGBTQIA+ policies going through the circulations across the United States, often specifically targeting our youth and our transgender community. So we want to advocate against those policies and create a more inclusive environment. I do encourage, especially as UUs, we're very active, especially as the political things go, reach out to your senators, reach out to your local legislators. We want to pass the Equality Act. It is more than high time after 10 plus years. The Equality Act would be not only impactful for the LGBTQI+ community in accessing public accommodations, job safety, and things like that. It also protects women and other minority groups, especially people of color. So the Equality Act does need to get passed as soon as possible. Create inclusive and safe spaces. UUG does an excellent job about that, so I don't feel like I need to give a brief lecture about that at all. And support and volunteer with your local LGBT centers. You all did an amazing job. I understand you passed out hundreds of popsicles yesterday after the Pride Parade, which is awesome. And you have a ton more, so if anyone needs popsicles, I'm told to send you to the back. But sponsor and of course attend your local Pride events. So we have UUG, or sorry, UUG is here, Gettysburg Pride still going on today, and next week we have York County Pride. The week after is Lancaster Pride, and there are dozens of Pride events throughout this month and into next month. Harrisburg Pride, Central PA Pride is on July 30th. So that is it for my service, but do we go right into closing words? I should get the offering. So I'm going to step aside.